This is the replacement of an automatic transmission on an 07 Ford Focus. This would apply to the 07, 06, 05. That's our old transmission off of it onto my replacement. You have to move this bracket in the back, transfer that, and transfer the dipstick tube, which is held on by a bolt in the back. And as long as it's out, you should replace this seal. Pry it out and then pound a new one in. Add about a quart of fluid to the torque converter. And you have to turn it a couple times to make sure it's fully set in. There it goes. The torque converter has 4 short bolts, and those bolts attach onto that flywheel, and we have to get these hoses and harnesses hoisted up out of the way as we lift that transmission back up here and slip it on and get some bolts started in the bell housing, and then there'll be an operation to get the bolts connected to that flywheel. Okay, we've lifted the transmission back up into place. We kind of teetered it on top of a block here with my floor jack, and you have to kind of balance it, hoist it up and shimmy it in place as you go. And if you can get close enough to get a guide pin through, and then you can twist it into place, get some bolts started, because that guide pin helps, because you have to also, if I can get a picture of it here, you have to get the torque converter bolts lined up and through the flywheel. So a lot of things have to line up all at once, and it's a tricky operation. And as I took it out, I put labels on every spot that I could possibly think of that I disconnected. Label everything, so that when you put it back in, it's just plug and play. And there's my little buddy. The transmission is bolted back in place, and the bolts are tightened down. When you take it out, you'll have to have some kind of brace to hold the engine up as you take the transmission out. I would assume there's manufactured devices for this. I just have a block of wood with 2 supports, some threaded rod and hooks going down to the eyelets on the engine here, supported across the frame of the car here. I'm hooking up the harnesses now. On the old transmission, you can see there's a plug in the back. There's one right on top that's very hard to get at. There's a bunch of hoses and harnesses going through here. And there's 2 in the front. 2 in the front here. One note as you are lifting the transmission back in place, on the underside, in the back, there is, if it shows up here, yeah, this back support has a bolt going through a bracket that I moved from the old tranny, and it may be nice to have this slipped in place as you raise the transmission up. I didn't, and I wrestled it in place. It can be done, but figure it out for yourself, I guess, whether you want this in here as you raise it up or if you want to wrestle it in after you get it in. There's enough things to line up, so it might be better to just put it in later. Okay, next step is the support on top of the transmission. Here's the old transmission. This support goes on like that on those 3 bolts. Or those 3 holes there. Yes, hi kitty. So that's going to go back in here. And then there's bolts like this that have a, you can get a socket on top there. So you drive this into the tranny, and then you can tighten the nut down on the support, and then there's going to be a bracket underneath the battery here that's going to hold that up. So that's our next couple of steps here to assemble this, and then we'll work on harnesses and continue on connections. Okay, next step is more support on this side here. This is the battery box holder. There's a bolt here and here. You take them out and you slip the black bracket in there, and then I need to raise the assembly back up and then slip in this support, and then that'll hold that side of the engine transmission up on the battery side. Okay, battery side of the transmission is mounted and secured. Next step is going to be to connect the torque converter to the flywheel. If I can zoom in there, it's there a little bolt passing through the flywheel. There's 4 of those connected on the torque converter, so I have to reach in there, spin on the nut, and then we'll secure it, tighten it down. I'm going to try and use a crude little device here. Hopefully will aid me in not dropping that nut down in the bell housing there. That would be a bad delay, and it'd be a pain in the butt to try and get it back out of there. So we're going to take some care and caution on this next step. Okay, flywheel and torque converter are attached and tightened. Next step is to put the starter in here. We've got a mounting bolt here and here, and a little terminal harness here, and that is going to attach onto, here's our starter. These 2 holes are mounting, and then the terminals are on the end here. Okay, next step is the intake manifold, and there are a number of electrical harnesses and hoses to hook back up once we get it mounted. As I took the bolts out holding it, just pop them into a scrap piece of cardboard to make sure I don't miss any as I'm putting it back in, because some of these are sort of hidden, and as you're taking it out, there's a hose connection on the bottom underside that's hard to see. So we'll get it mounted, and then we can reconnect our harnesses back up and hoses, and we'll review that. Intake manifold is in, and a number of harnesses. There's a couple on this side. There's 2 or 3 harnesses and hoses down in the front. Accelerator cable hookup, and a couple of harnesses over on this side. So they're all plugged back in. Next step is the battery box, or air box. That just goes down in this spot here. with these two bolts, and the air hose goes in between there. You get that connected, and after that put the battery in, and then we'll move on to drive shafts. Okay, time to put the drive shafts back in. In order to get them out, when I was taking the old transmission out on the passenger side and driver side, I just disconnected the lower control arm so I could swing the strut wheel assembly out here. That allows me to pull this passenger side. It just slips right out of the transmission once you take off this bearing holder. This side just slips right out. The driver's side is held in by a set ring or something on the end of the drive shaft spline. So since I was junking the tranny anyway, just reach in through this passenger side and tap the driver's side drive shaft out. And in doing so, I damaged some of it and damaged the end of it when I was pounding it out of the wheel on that side. So we have a new one ordered to put in on that side. This afternoon we put a new transmission filter in and added fluid. Took it for a good long test drive, and it performed awesomely, so it should be ready to get back into service.